January 17th, 1991. 3 in the morning. 8 RAF jets taxi onto the runway in complete radio silence. No lights, no communication, just the roar of engines in the Saudi desert darkness. Their target, the most heavily defended airfields in Iraq, bristling with anti-aircraft guns, surface-to-air missiles, and radar systems that had been specifically designed to kill aircraft like theirs. And here is what made this mission different from every other aircraft flying that night. The Americans couldn't do what these 8 jets were about to do. Not because their pilots weren't good enough, not because their aircraft weren't capable enough. Because the weapon these jets carried, the mission they were about to fly, belonged exclusively to the RAF Tornado, and NATO had spent months questioning whether it would work at all. Before we get into what happened, tell me something in the comments. Had you even heard of the JP-233 before today? Because most people haven't. And that's exactly why this story never got the attention it deserved. To understand what the Tornado did over Iraq, you need to understand what it was built for, and why that made everyone nervous. The Panavia Tornado GR-1 was a Cold War weapon, designed in the 1970s for one specific mission, flying at treetop height in complete darkness through the forests and valleys of East Germany, attacking Warsaw-packed airfields before Soviet aircraft could get airborne. Low level, high speed, unguided bombs, in and out before the enemy knew what hit them. RAF Tornado crews trained for this every single day, skimming the hills of Scotland and Wales at 200 feet and 600 miles per hour, in weather that grounded everything else, in conditions that pushed both pilot and aircraft to the absolute edge of what was survivable. They were extraordinarily good at it. But when Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990 and the coalition began assembling in the Gulf, a problem emerged immediately. The Tornado had been built for Europe, for hills and forests and the narrow geography of NATO's central front. Iraq was flat, open, desert, with air bases the size of Heathrow Airport, surrounded by anti-aircraft systems that had nothing to hide behind. The question inside NATO planning was blunt. Could the Tornado do in Iraq what it had been trained to do in Europe? Some doubted it. Some said the losses would be unacceptable. Some pointed to the Americans, their F-16s, their F-111s, their precision weapons, and asked whether Britain's low-level Cold War bomber was the right tool for this war. The Tornado crews didn't wait for the debate to settle. They went anyway. Here is the detail that changes everything. When coalition planners sat down to plan the air campaign against Iraq, they had one overriding priority: destroy the Iraqi Air Force on the ground, keep Saddam's jets from getting airborne, crater the runways, destroy the taxiways, make every Iraqi airfield unusable before the ground war began. The problem was, cratering runways is harder than it sounds. A standard bomb dropped from altitude makes a hole. Iraqi engineers could fill a bomb hole in hours. What coalition planners needed wasn't holes. They needed runways that couldn't be repaired. Runways littered with thousands of submunitions that would detonate when anyone tried to fix them. The Americans looked at their inventory. They didn't have it. The RAF did. The JP-233, a weapon that existed nowhere else in the NATO arsenal, carried exclusively by the Tornado GR-1, 2 massive pods, one under each wing, each containing 30 SG-357 cratering bomblets and 2 15 HB-876 area denial munitions. In a single pass at low level, one Tornado could simultaneously crater a runway and scatter hundreds of mines across the surrounding area, mines designed to detonate under the weight of a repair vehicle or the footstep of an engineer trying to fill the craters. The USAF had no equivalent. The F-16 couldn't carry it. No other aircraft in the coalition could deliver what the JP-233 delivered. If the coalition wanted Iraqi runways destroyed and kept destroyed, it needed the Tornado. And the Tornado needed to fly at 200 feet to deliver it, over the most heavily defended targets in Iraq. In the dark. January 17th, 1991. The air war begins. 4 jets from Dhahran, 8 from Muharraq, each carrying a pair of JP-233 pods, the full runway denial package, flying in radio silence, no formation lights, total darkness. Navigator Mal Craghill, the youngest Tornado navigator of the Gulf War, later described the approach to H-3 airfield in western Iraq. In the distance, what looked like twinkling lights. His crew trying to work out what they were seeing. People signaling on the ground, some kind of warning system. As they got closer, it became clear. It was anti-aircraft fire. Thousands of rounds rising from the airfield defenses. The twinkling lights were tracer, and the Tornado was flying directly into them at 200 feet and 600 miles per hour with no option to turn back. We could see what seemed to be twinkling lights, Craghill said. As we got closer, it was very evident that what it actually was anti-aircraft fire from H-3 airfield where we were going. They flew through it anyway. The JP-233 pods released. Cratering bomblets hit the runway. Area denial munitions scattered across the taxiways and dispersal areas. The Tornado pulled away and headed for home. That same night, across multiple Iraqi airfields, the same scene was playing out. RAF crews flying into walls of anti-aircraft fire, delivering a weapon no other coalition aircraft could carry, on a mission no other aircraft could fly. And paying a price for it. This is the part of the story that has to be told honestly. Low-level operations over Iraq were not like low-level operations over the Scottish Highlands. In Scotland, there were hills to hide behind. In Iraq, there was nothing. Flat desert. Radar with a clear line of sight in every direction. Anti-aircraft gunners who could see you coming from miles away and track you all the way to the target. On the first night of Desert Storm, one Tornado was shot down by an Iraqi SA-16 missile during a low-level bombing run. The crew, Flight Lieutenant John Peters and Flight Lieutenant John Nichol, ejected and were captured. Their faces appeared on Iraqi television. It became one of the defining images of the war. On the 19th of January, another Tornado was shot down during a raid on Talil Air Base. The losses continued. By the end of the conflict, 6 RAF Tornado GR-1s had been lost in combat, a significant proportion of the total coalition aircraft losses for the entire war. The RAF command faced a decision. The JP-233 missions were working. Iraqi airfields were being hit, runways cratered, repair operations disrupted. But the price in aircraft and crews was real and rising. After 5 nights of low-level operations, the decision was made. The Tornado would switch to medium altitude. And here is where the second chapter of this story begins. At medium altitude, the JP-233 was useless. It required low-level delivery. The Tornado now needed a different weapon, a different mission, a different way to be relevant in a war that had moved on from the desperate low-level airfield attacks of the opening nights. What it needed was laser guidance. A small number of RAF Tornadoes had been fitted with the tailed pod, thermal imaging and laser designator, a targeting system that allowed the aircraft to find, track and laser designate targets for paveway laser-guided bombs from medium altitude. The results were immediate and extraordinary. RAF historian and author Klaus Christian Seinmann later described the TL'd-equipped Tornadoes as achieving probably the most accurate bombing in the RAF's history. In 18 days of TL'd guided operations, RAF Tornadoes hit 229 pinpoint targets. The aircraft that had been questioned, that had taken losses in the opening phase, that some had suggested couldn't adapt to a war it hadn't been designed for, had transformed itself. From a low-level Cold War airfield attacker into a precision strike platform hitting individual targets inside Iraq with accuracy that left American planners requesting more RAF Tornado TL'd missions. The same aircraft, different weapon, same crews. 229 targets in 18 days. Here is the comparison that puts the Tornado's achievement in full context. While RAF Tornadoes were flying JP-233 missions against Iraqi airfields in the opening nights of Desert Storm, American F-16s from a National Air Guard squadron were also tasked with attacking one of those airfields. The airfield had already been severely damaged by previous strikes. It was, by that point, largely disabled. 20 F-16s, 40 iron bombs. They hit the main runway once. Not because the F-16 crews weren't capable. The F-16 is an exceptional aircraft, and the pilots flying it were professionals. But the F-16 wasn't designed for what the Tornado was designed for. It didn't carry JP-233. It didn't have the low-level penetration profile, the terrain-following radar. The specific weapons architecture that made the Tornado, and only the Tornado, capable of delivering runway denial on the scale the coalition needed. The USAF itself acknowledged this. RAF official records confirm that coalition air component commanders had warmly embraced the British offer to deploy the Tornado in the airfield denial role, precisely because the USAF lacked dedicated airfield denial platforms and munitions. Britain brought a capability to Desert Storm that America, with the largest air force on Earth, could not replicate. That is the Tornado's Gulf War legacy. Behind the statistics and the weapons analysis, there were people. Tornado crews flying into walls of tracer fire at 200 feet. Navigators watching twinkling lights resolve into anti-aircraft rounds as they approached their targets. Pilots holding course through air that was trying to kill them because the mission required it, and they had trained their entire careers for exactly this. John Peters and John Nichol, shot down on the first night, held as prisoners of war, their faces broadcast to the world by Iraqi television, became symbols of what the Tornado campaign cost. Peters later wrote about his captivity. Nichol did the same. Neither man expressed regret about the mission. Mal Craghill, who flew 24 missions during the Gulf War and dropped the last RAF bomb of the conflict, described the moment the ceasefire was called. His crew was still being debriefed when the news came through. The RAF Tornado force flew more than 1,500 combat sorties during Desert Storm. They destroyed airfields, hit munitions depots, struck oil refineries, and in the final phase, with TL'd, delivered some of the most precise bombing the RAF had ever achieved. NATO had questioned whether the Tornado was the right aircraft for this war. The answer came in 229 pinpoint targets, cratered runways across western Iraq, and a capability that no other coalition aircraft could provide. In January 1991, NATO planners looked at the Tornado and wondered whether a Cold War low-level bomber could fight a different kind of war. The answer came at 200 feet over Iraqi airfields in the dead of night, in weapon pods that no other aircraft carried, on missions that no other crew could fly. It came at a cost: real losses, real crews, real prisoners of war whose faces appeared on television screens around the world. And it came in 229 pinpoint targets hit in 18 days, when the aircraft that some had doubted adapted, evolved, and delivered precision that left American planners asking for more. NATO didn't trust the Tornado over Iraq until it destroyed what the F-16s couldn't. And now I want to know, did you know about JP-233 before this video? Drop it in the comments, because this weapon changed the course of the Gulf War air campaign, and almost nobody outside the RAF has ever heard of it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. I'll see you in the next one.